What a blessing this morning, too, to begin with beautiful gospel music. And thank you so much to Reverend Michelle Morris for blessing us this morning with prayer. We're so grateful you could be here with us today, and so grateful you could listen in, too, because this morning we're going to be talking about one of the most exciting provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act, and one that I geek out on all the time, not only because I'm so excited about what it does, but I'm also so excited about what the direct pay or elective pay, as IRS likes to call it, provision means for community ownership. And we are all just so grateful today that Laurel Blatchford, who is the Chief Implementation Officer for the IRA at the U.S. Department of the Treasury, is here to walk us through it. And I also just want to testify to how blessed the U.S. Department of the Treasury is, and also all of us, in this country, to have Laurel at the helm of implementation. We've talked a lot together over the course of this conference about servant leadership. We've had many people speak to the importance of that value and to embrace the importance of leading with service, and Laurel epitomizes that. She epitomizes that with love, with love for the importance of building into our institutions, leaving not just the policy, but the place better than when she joined. And I'm just so thankful that you're here with us this morning to share and to connect and to listen and to be a part of the community that we've been building together over the past couple of days. So Laurel, please come on up.
Thank you. I'm going to use this podium. Thank you, Michelle. I think you are also a servant leader. So thank you for inviting me. It sounds like it's been an amazing few days. Sorry I could not get here sooner, but next year. It's so great to be here. What I think I'll do this morning is spend maybe 15, 20 minutes talking to you about our work, give you some grounding. I know there's a lot of different perspectives in this room. And then I'm really hoping for a dialogue. I'm standing here because I need to hold my paper up, but I'm happy to walk and talk with all of you. And as I was just saying to somebody over here, the insights and the questions from all of you are a big part of what will make our implementation successful. So really glad to be here. Let me just start by putting a few things in perspective. So the Inflation Reduction Act, that's the investment du jour or du decade. But this is building on a long history of investment. In 1930, 2.1% of farms here in Arkansas had electricity. The New Deal then brought massive government investment in rural electrification, bringing these communities into the 20th century. And now, nearly 100 years later, the IRA is ushering in a new day for our nation and for rural America in particular. Alongside the investments in the bipartisan infrastructure law, which I know you probably have talked a lot about and will talk about, the IRA provides opportunities to create good-paying jobs in clean energy and manufacturing, strengthen our energy security as a country, which I think given current events around the world is underscored, and lower utility and gas bills for Americans nationwide. Good paying jobs, cost savings, and investment in the future of our children and grandchildren. The IRA, as has been mentioned, and this is where my community development heart is particularly warmed, focuses investments in places. Right? It's industry focused, but it's also about places and communities and workers that have been left behind by economic changes, manufacturing losses, and lack of investment in decades past. A recent analysis by our department found that the IRA's initial round of investments in the first year of the bill are in fact concentrated in areas where college graduation rates are lower than average, in counties with above average poverty rates, and where weekly wages are lower than the national average. This is good. This is good for communities in the Rust Belt, for energy communities in Appalachia, Intermountain West, good for tribes, Alaska Native communities, and it's an incredible set of investments, and we hope that this trajectory will continue. Thanks to the IRA, more than 900 rural electric co-ops that provide power to 32 million Americans can now benefit from direct payments for over a dozen clean energy tax credits. Rural leaders like yourselves will have an important role in driving the growth of the clean energy economy and ensuring the benefits are felt truly widely. The law also allocates $13 billion through the U.S. Department of Agriculture to support rural opportunities in clean energy projects, which will create jobs, spur economic growth, and reach more than, we hope, 41,000 small businesses and farms. This includes programs that rural utilities, co-ops, and communities know well, from grants in the Rural Energy for America program, or REAP, to $9.7 billion in new funding and financing through the Rural Utility Services new Empowering Rural America program, New ERA program. And in just 1 year, we have seen over 200 announced clean energy projects concentrating communities that have the most to gain. Rural Mingo County, West Virginia, where nearly 1/3 of residents are below the poverty line, is set to host a new clean ammonia production facility, a $3 billion project expected to support 2,000 construction jobs. So that's some context. Let's talk about what we're doing at Treasury. We have a big responsibility to deliver on the promise of this bill, and our ongoing efforts really focus in 3 domains. First, as you know, there's a lot of tax guidance, and so we are quickly developing and issuing that guidance as quickly as we can to provide clarity and certainty about how the tax incentives, both the current and the new ones, will operate in practice. Second, we are working with the IRS. I spend most of my day working with them in various ways to put in place modern, streamlined processes for taxpayers to claim those incentives. And third, conducting stakeholder engagement and outreach to inform our approach and educate the public about benefits that are now available. And this is, I should say, not something that Treasury has historically done. So it's part of why I think they brought a practitioner like me to have these conversations, but just want to underscore that third point. We'll come back to that. Also want to highlight, as I'm sure you're aware, the Biden-Harris administration drew up a rural playbook to help communities access infrastructure funding. And we are over one of 20 federal agencies supporting that work through bill and now IRA. So let's talk about IRA. As many of you know, the IRA includes tax incentives for a broad range of green activities, which cover energy generation and carbon capture, clean vehicles, clean energy-related domestic manufacturing, clean fuels, and energy-efficient buildings. Since it was signed into law in August 2022, Treasury has issued more than 40 pieces of guidance on new green tax provisions. These are provisions that rural co-ops, state and local governments, businesses, and nonprofits, and others represented in this room can take advantage of. I know many of you are paying close attention, and I can assure you the Treasury team is working hard, very, very hard, to provide clarity and certainty to taxpayers. And it's just an enormous volume. And you add in the chips and all of the other pieces. But we know there's a lot to do quickly, really so that the climate and economic benefits can be felt as quickly as possible. So let me dig a little bit deeper into the piece of the bill that Michelle mentioned. It's a novel mechanism known as elective pay, and yes, the IRS insists on calling it that. It is also called direct pay. Don't tell them I told you that. I love the IRS, but they have their ways. Treasury and the IRS issued a proposed regulation on this provision in June, and will carefully consider public feedback before decisions are made on the substance of the final rule. So what I'm going to share is the current proposal, and just want to offer this disclaimer. We are very, very careful because when we write tax rules, they're law, and people use them to do important things like claim benefits and file taxes. So I'm not able to comment on opinions, interpretations, or taxpayer-specific questions here. But the part of the goal, like I said a few minutes ago, is to talk about this, and so want to make sure you know more about it within those constraints. So, as many of you know, elective pay will significantly expand the reach of the clean energy tax credits, unlike competitive grant and loan programs in which applicants may apply but not receive an award. Elective pay allows entities to receive a tax-free cash payment upon registering and filing with the IRS if they meet the requirements for elective pay and the underlying tax credit or tax credits. So, to be a little more specific, applicable entities can use elective pay for 12 of the IRA's tax credits, as well as certain cross-cutting provisions and bonuses. So they kind of stack on each other, and would offer a little more detail. These underlying credits that I'm referring to can be broken into 4 main categories: energy generation and carbon capture, manufacturing, vehicles, and fuels. For producing electricity from eligible clean energy sources, and investing in clean energy sources, these credits provide tax incentives for wind, geothermal, solar, energy storage, nuclear, and more for businesses or applicable entities that buy qualified commercial clean vehicles, including motor vehicles for use on public roads, for farming, construction, and other operations. That's another category. There's also a credit for alternative fuel vehicle refueling and charging property that is located in low-income and urban and non-urban areas. And there's several other credits as well. This is all available on the IRS website. We'll be happy to send all of this out if you want to have a guide to the pieces of what I'm talking about. Would also highlight that under the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements that apply to a number of the credits created or modified by the IRA, the credit amount is increased by 5 times, a lot of money, for projects that meet requirements for paying prevailing wages and using registered apprentices. So the IRA has applied prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements to clean energy tax incentives for the first time. And so this, I think, is also worth drawing attention to, given this is a really critical moment for America's workforce in tackling climate change as well as supporting the energy transition. For the domestic content bonus, projects or facilities that meet domestic content requirements are eligible for a 10% increase in the PTC and up to a 10 percentage point increase in the ITC, and the energy communities bonus applies to projects located in historical energy communities, including areas with closed coal mines, coal-fired power plants, and these projects are also eligible for a 10% increase in the PTC and up to a 10% point increase in the ITC. Lot to say here. The bonus is also available to brownfield sites in areas that have significant employment or local tax revenues from fossil fuels and higher than average unemployment. I'll say one more and then we'll go deeper in elective pay. The 48e low-income communities bonus credit provides an additional investment tax credit for certain solar and wind facilities located in low-income communities. In partnership with DOE, the Department of Energy, Treasury, and the IRS began accepting applications last week and are expecting a large volume of applicants in all application categories. So I would encourage you to look at that. That is actually one of the only credits that has an allocation cap. All the others are open. So elective pay, let's come back to that. How do I register? If you're interested in capturing that benefit or applying it to other credits, first, you do have to complete your project and place it into service. After the facility is placed into service, you need to complete a pre-filing registration process, which is expected to be available later this year. I will just digress for a moment and say, one of the interesting things about implementation in this context is the IRS, as we know, deals with lots and lots of different kinds of taxpayers. This is a first for dealing with tax-exempt entities. By definition, they do not file taxes. So we are creating this fall this pre-registration process, which for those of you who are interested in government operations, I'm happy to have an offline conversation about, but it will be amazing and it will allow tax-exempt entities to register to get these benefits. As part of pre-registration, you'll need to know your tax year and understand when your tax return will be due, which I think sounds straightforward, but I think particularly for the entities who are eligible under elective pay, which are nonprofits, state and local government, many of them have different tax year, especially the local government fiscal years that map against the federal tax year differently. Elective pay is only effective for taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2022, so 2023 and beyond. And as I just said, if your taxable year begins in the middle of the calendar year, elective pay only applies to the taxable year that begins in 2023. So again, if you're a city that, like I worked for New York City for a long time, our fiscal year was July 1st to June 30th. So those are all things to consider. But once the pre-filing registration process is complete, you will receive a registration number for each facility you intend to claim to provide when filing your return. And then you file your return, and a valid election lets you receive payment as a refund for the amount of the credit. This occurs after the filing process. So again, as someone who's done a lot of work in different kinds of federal benefits, you can claim this, but it also comes at the end of that tax year. So it's just it's a different sequencing and timing. I also want to talk a little bit about grants and loans in relation to elective pay. In general, elective pay applicable entity is able to earn a tax credit during the taxable year, as I just said, that the applicable credit property is placed in service. This means upfront capital for projects has to be secured prior to claiming elective pay. However, elective pay entities can use tax credit payments received after filing their return to repay sources of bridge financing. So this is something I'm hearing in a lot of conversations, is that need for bridge financing, which again, know exists in lots of contexts, but particularly in something like this. There's also a special rule that will allow entities to combine grants and forgivable loans with tax credits. So that's another source of financing. So if an investment-related credit property is funded by a tax-free grant or forgivable loan, entities would get the same value of eligible tax credits if the investment were financed with taxable funds, provided the credit plus restricted tax-exempt amounts do not exceed the cost of investment. So a good example of this, to try to put it into the real world, is the New Era Grant Program. This program was also made available through the IRA, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, and it helps rural Americans transition to clean energy. New Era provides both loans and grants, with grants equal to up to 25% of project cost for investments like building and deploying renewable energy. And by reducing air and water pollution, New Era funding improves health outcomes and lowers energy costs. And it's available also to member-owned rural electric cooperatives. I'm sure you all know this. The administration is already seeing the excitement around this program. According to the USDA, over $43 billion in total funds have been requested to date, totaling 900 projects across the country. That's roughly 4 times the available funding, so it's really leveraging a lot of other funding. But just to get a little more specific, for rural co-ops that win funding under this program, tax credits can potentially help reimburse remaining project costs through an elective pay received after filing. And even for co-ops that don't win grant funding, their projects potentially remain eligible for clean energy tax credits. So this kind of what we call in the federal world, like braiding and blending of funds, which I know is complicated and not easy. We're trying to help. But it's really important to think about when you think about elective pay. And the Treasury tax credits I talked about are part of it, but it's also all these other funding sources too. We'll give you one more example. Another place where I think we're going to see this kind of braiding and blending is with the Solar for All program that EPA has put out. Under Solar for All, EPA is going to award 60 grants with a total allocation of $7 billion to increase the number of disadvantaged and low-income neighborhoods primed for residential solar investment. And these grantees will be required to spend 75% of grant awards on the installation for rooftop solar. And applicants are looking to clean energy tax credits to help fill the financing gap. And I know this is not exclusively focused on rural communities, but many, I think, will be eligible given the program's low-income community requirement. Earlier this year, 44 out of 50 states submitted notices of their intent to apply for this program. And notices of intent came from lots of local governments too, New York, LA, Chicago, but also from places like Marianna, Arkansas, Elizabethtown, North Carolina, and Lawrence County, Kentucky. So this is, by the way, all publicly available information. It's an interesting question of who's in the pipeline that I would encourage you to look. The ability to braid and blend funding with grants and forgivable loans provides optionality and flexibility. So I know that many of you are thinking about that and how to do that. So there are a lot of resources available at irs.gov, including 50 FAQs on elective pay, a loan, and individualized fact sheets in English and Spanish. I have also brought a fact sheet here, more generally in the IRA, that's on the table. We are keenly aware, especially in conversations like this, the IRS and the Treasury guidance is legally defined. We are also keenly aware of the need for plain language tools. So this brings me to my last point about stakeholder engagement. It is critical that we talk with stakeholders like you and understand what you're trying to solve for. Since joining Treasury, I've been going around the country as well as meeting with lots of different conferences and people in different places in DC who come, like the counties and the cities and the state associations. And there is just a clear desire to take advantage of these provisions. There's also a clear set of questions about when is it going to happen? Is it going to apply to me? And how do I access it? And so we are continuing to think holistically about how to address that need. So again, it goes back to my point. Use the FAQs, use the irs.gov website. We are also working to provide tools like you have here and others, and would love to just also hear from you today about what would be most useful. We are also, last point, working with lots of other agencies. I know sometimes the federal government can have a right hand, left hand problem. And that I'm sure can't be totally eliminated, but we are working very closely with what we call the interagency, the group of agencies that are all working to implement this bill. And so know that will also, that braiding and blending conversation that I was just sort of starting here will continue. I want to pause, like I said, I want to have the conversation. So I'm just going to pause and say thank you for your time this morning. And it's just a real honor. Thank you, Michelle, for inviting me. It's a real honor to be here and to start the conversation with you today and into the future. So do you want to do an FAQ up here? You might have a format in mind, knowing you.
I will. I'll take the mic out, and so you can stay there or come down as you're comfortable, and we'll take questions from this group. All right. And actually, maybe we'll start with Josh, and I'll come to you, Keith. All right.
Thanks for coming. I really appreciate you being here. Josh Ewing with the Rural Climate Partnership. I'm just curious, like, what's the practical reason for the pre-filing requirement? It's like, I guess
it's a good
it would
question.
help me to understand like that when we're explaining it to people. It seems like you file your taxes, you get your tax, do your tax return. Is it so you guys have forecast like how much you're going to have to pay out, or
no?
Like,
it's actually a very simple reason, which is you as an individual, or me as an individual, or an LLC or a business. Everybody has a taxpayer ID number, right? For folks like people filing individually, that's your SSN, your EIN. Tax-exempt entities do not have those. So in order for the IRS to accurately, follow the paperwork through their process of receiving a return and making the payment, they need that registration process to happen.
So every tax-exempt entity that I give grants to has an EIN.
Yeah, they. So it has to do with how the IRS monitors and registers, and then how they make payments. So the back end, we're setting up actually, again, tell me if I go too far down this. Right now, today, we are working to set up the same technology to provide a portal for dealers who are interested in accessing the clean energy credits. So it's going to be the same portal, but it connects in a way that builds a clearer process inside the IRS, the prospective taxpayer with how the payment is going to be received.
So it's more about the payment flow, so like this money is coming from the IRA versus some other thing.
Yes, and I would also say working more closely with the IRS in the last few years, like the amount of fraud, waste, and abuse that has occurred, it really has increased. And I don't know that it's like people making mistakes. I'm talking here about like fraudsters and criminal syndicates. Like this went off the charts in the pandemic. So I think there is a continued concern about making sure that those processes are as clear and ethical as possible. You have this trade-off when you're the IRS between slowing everything down so you can look at every single return, which is not right, but you also need to have a informed audit process. So that's another whole part of what the commissioner is leading, is a way to make sure that we're preventing fraud that relies on new tools and technologies as well. So that's just a little bit more background. The IRA has a huge investment in the IRS itself and modernization of the IRS that will allow it to deliver these credits, but also other benefits. So it is I think, both fraud protection and clarity provision.
Thank you so much.
You mentioned
Identify yourself.
I'm Keith Dennis with the Beneficial Electrification League.
Hello.
Work with the electric co-ops a lot on the New Era program, especially. You mentioned $43 billion worth of New Era applications, and obviously that's a big market for the direct pay. We see applications that have dozens of projects in various areas, and we're trying to figure out, which ones are in low-income areas and everything else like that. And they are, thinking about doing direct pay as, kind of to pay back the loan. Mm-hmm. So the most pressing issue that we have right now is trying to figure out whether or not these applications that have solar projects and potentially storage, but I get your thoughts on that are in low-income areas need to register for the low-income bonus now, given that they don't know if they're going to win, and they have 11 years to actually do that project. Because they see the guidance coming out and they say, we got a time-limited low-income credit. Should I be doing something? And I don't really know how to advise them on that.
I don't think I can either, given the tax advice concern, but I think it's a really important strategic question. The only thing I will say is we have seen significant interest in the 48 little e program since opening that portal 3 weeks ago. And I guess I'm like, as a person, I'm like, pursue all options. I know that doesn't actually make it easier, right, if you have limited time. And
yeah. Well, here's a question for you. So first off, does that 10-20% bonus become part of the direct pay?
Yes.
Okay. So then is that time limited? Like if I had a project and I was going to build it in 2 years, would I register now?
I would recommend that. I don't know the specifics of what you're talking about, and I'm happy to take it back to the team and ask for a hypothetical that might be more responsive to your question. I would also just say we are anticipating opening another round of 48 little e sometime in the spring.
Right.
So I think there's a sequencing question that isn't just about this round, but it's about other rounds as well.
And then
can I say one more thing about 48 little e? Just again, putting on my, one of the tensions I live with day to day is how to get people aware of as this complex set of things is being operationalized. The more we can demonstrate interest and support and demand, quite frankly, for these things, I think the more it's going to be protected in the law moving forward. So that's another thing that we're always thinking about, is how to make sure that people do engage in programs like 48 little e. So that's another plug I would make for thinking about your engagement.
Well, I'll give you an example because it might be helpful for you. But the PACE program, which is kind of like New Era, in Kansas, there's 2 big groups of municipal governments, municipal electric utilities, KMEA, KPP. They put in an application for $100 million worth of solar at 100 different sites. They've heard back from USDA to move forward on their application. They don't know about this. They're trying to figure out shape files and all this other stuff. Are they in the census tracts? But we could completely go back to them and say, look, let's screen all this for things in the disadvantaged so you can get the 10-20%. And that would make a difference. That would be, they weren't even going to apply for that if we didn't come and tell them about it. So that's sort of where we are with this. They're not tax people. They're not,
It's really helpful. I mean, again, as I was saying to somebody before I came up here, sitting in the Treasury Department building is not going to tell you these kinds of things, right? So thank you for lifting that up. And I would say just keep sharing these kinds of examples and stories about how you're thinking about these trade-offs, because the more we can over time clarify eligibility and timing, I hope it will help you.
Yeah, and then one quick thing. You said solar and wind.
That's actually 5 questions.
Well, it's all one question in my mind.
The mic after
all right, here we go. But when you say solar and wind, does that include if you have a battery there?
I don't know the answer to that. I'll double check.
Thank you so much for the wonderful. I love how geeky the questions are.
Hi, I'm Todd with Suncrop Solar and Energy Solutions. Hello. We're a small contractor in eastern Arkansas. It's actually a follow-up to that question. My understanding is that the bonus credits are capped per fiscal year.
Yes.
Are the windows tied to the application windows tied to particular fiscal years, or an application now could roll potentially into future fiscal years?
I think, unfortunately, the answer is it depends on the credit.
Okay.
Sorry. This is, and not going to blame how it was written, but you can imagine there's been a lot of cooks in the kitchen. If you have a specific question, I'm happy to take it back to the team.
Great, thank you. And just introduce yourself first.
Hi, I'm Autumn Long with the Appalachian Solar Finance Fund. And I'm curious if you can provide any insight into the expected timeline between filing for elective payment and remittance of that payment by U.S. Treasury.
That is I don't know how many $1 million question, depends on your project. All I can say at this point is we're trying to make it as short a timeline as possible. It goes back to this question of the registration portal and how we use it and how it's connected. And it depends also on the IRS and their resources. But But I think the only thing I can say right now is as quickly as possible.
Right here.
Hello.
Luis Bernal with Appalachian Regional Commission. For an entity that receives a grant in which the terms and conditions will require compliance with Davis-Bacon and the domestic preference as required by the uniform guidance, would Treasury, IRS, recognize those as being in compliance for the bonuses perspective?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So if let's say that I am a grantee, my grant terms and conditions will require me to abide by the prevailing wages as Davis-Bacon. And
You're
I
talking
want
about other federal funding that might have it. Sorry, now I understand.
Yes.
Yep.
So in developing my project,
Yep.
part of my capital stack will have grants from, let's say, ARC, because our statute will require
Yep, I understand.
Davis-Bacon, for example. Would the IRS consider that the entity that, as a result of being in compliance with a grant that requires those two elements,
Would you be
will
eligible for the
automatically,
other?
be considered?
I don't actually know the answer. Can I get back to you on that?
Yeah.
It's a really good question. I come, like I said, from affordable housing, community development, and we have that issue a lot.
Yeah.
But let me go back to the team and ask.
Thank you.
I know the guidance is also being finalized, so it's a good question. If they haven't thought of it, I'll make sure they think of it.
If you want me to feed you with a lot of questions, I can do that.
No, happy. I just feel, I'm someone who likes to try to answer everything to the nth degree, so sorry that I can't provide all the answers
I
today.
was just thinking, actually, it's wonderful that folks are posing these questions because, part of, Laurel's leadership is service leadership, and coming from a community development background is listening. So these questions are incredibly helpful.
Very much.
All right. Thank you.
Hey, Laurel, I'm Lauren Waldrop with the Arkansas Advanced Energy Association. So we work with farmers and solar developers alike that are working on these projects in rural areas. And mine's really just a technical question that I haven't been able to find someone at the IRS to answer. Can you tell me if that ITC is pre-REAP grant or post?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
Can you add it to your list?
Absolutely. No. And this is part of why I'm here. It's not to just talk about platitudes, but I think, again, the IRS, I'll also figure out what comments I need to take in writing. That's another dimension to this, and circle back, but I would be glad to try to chase that down.
Okay. Questions? I have a question for you, Laura. While others formulate, raise your hands. I'll bring a mic over to you. We have time for probably 3 more questions. You've got a really diverse group of people in the room in terms of where they come from geographically, sectorally, how they connect into rural and small town communities. And I'm looking here at our 2 pastors as well, because, Groundswell works with a lot of churches, and direct pay or elective pay, means that those nonprofit institutions can get the value back directly to contribute towards community ownership. And community ownership is really about the co-ops too, and the municipalities, and all these agencies being able to participate. But can you speak a little bit about, from a policy perspective, how y'all see community ownership as being part of this?
I'm so glad you called that out, because on a personal level, this is one of the things I'm most excited about, is the ability, and again, it's complicated. You hear all these questions, you see all the ways that we're working with the IRS, and we're not quite there yet. But I think being able to get to a place where that tax credit equity investment that in a mediated market has to go through a whole process of syndication, that now means that directly, nonprofits, churches, lots and lots of different kinds of tax-exempt organizations can actually get that payment directly. And that's really the hope, is that it allows for those kinds of effectively equity investments that then allow you to decide how you want to structure what you're doing. I know many of these nonprofits are community-focused, community-owned, right? It puts that money right back into the hands of those owners and participants. So it is critical. I would also say, when I look at the community development field and The low-income housing tax credit was passed in the mid-'80s. It took 30-plus years to create a financing field that took into account not only, and the big banks were there very quickly and brought a lot of really important capital, but also brought in other ways of structuring ownership, other kinds of capital like CDFIs. So I think we have a challenge to build something similar in this part of the world, meaning this part of the tax world, where it's not just going to be incumbent upon nonprofits to try to figure this out, but who's going to help provide that advice, that support, that bridge financing. I know there are a lot of people thinking about how to do this and how to figure this out, but to me, that's the work of the next 3 to 5 years, is so that your churches can go to a place that to get that financing to support all the things you need to do to then claim elective pay. So it's a long journey, but I'm glad we're on it. Please.
Reverend Johnson worked with Groundswell, actually. And as Michelle pointed out, we organize many churches to participate in community solar. But here's what we've learned. Most of these churches are not 501c3s.
Yep.
They're just nonprofit as their Secretary of State's office is concerned.
Yep.
So my question is, does the absence of the 501c3 impact the church's participation in the elective pay?
You need to have the 501c3 status. I would say, again, there's lots of models to create that mechanism to enable the receipt of the funding. So community development corporations and I assume you've thought about how to do this. But yeah, that is part of the law, the way it's written.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Reverend. And I have another question for you. Okay, right here. No, we'll come to you next, Mark. Just introduce yourself first, please.
Mark Heiliger with Solar Power of Oklahoma. We're installer on the ground. What resources would you recommend to watch to stay on top of, as we progress and get the answers to some of the things that you're talking about? What would be the best resources for that?
Cleanenergy.gov, I think, is a good resource that tries, I say tries because it's an ongoing effort, to bring together lots of the federal funding streams we've talked about today. We are also in the process of trying to build like a clean energy, clear language website.
Clean language too.
Yes, all of it. Plain energy, clean language website on our site. So we'll keep working on that, but I would start with cleanenergy.gov. And again, I'm happy to give you guys my contact information, and I have an entire team I've built to try to engage and learn from these questions. So whether it's me or the Army that we're building, we will be as responsive as we can.
All right. Reverend Johnson.
Another question.
I've got 2 follow-up questions. One, you mentioned rooftop solar. We have some pastors that are going to work on carports with EV stations. So I'm going to presume those count as well.
Yes, there is a different underlying credit, but yes.
Wonderful. Next question. Many of the church constructs have umbrella C3s. So you'll have, here in Arkansas, there is a Baptist Association for Southern Baptists, and that entity has a C3. And then all of the other ones may have registration with Secretary of State, et cetera, but that C3, I'm presuming that's their fiscal agent, as it were.
That's a great idea. You didn't hear it from me. That's not tax advice, but that is a great idea. That intermediation, right, is needed, especially if there's lots of congregations, right, that have maybe small staffs or 1 or 2 projects.
So you're suggesting that C3 held by the parent entity?
That's just an idea that I'm not advising you as a Treasury official to do, but yes.
Reverend Johnson is also an attorney. So he's got a little extra superpower here. I'm going to ask you another question.
I know when I'm being cross-examined.
So if there anyone else, raise your hand. But you also have a lot, and including folks who haven't asked questions yet, who were great amplifiers, who serve networks like Keith, working with rural co-ops and municipal utilities all over the country. And I'm not going to call out anybody else, but from having gotten to know a lot of folks over the course of the past couple of days together, what can we, collectively be doing as a field to help demystify some of this stuff because it is, beautifully wonky and wonderful. And as a unrecovered policymaker myself, I also appreciate the complexity of the work y'all are doing to do all the things and also make it accessible. But how can we participate and help?
It's such a good question, and I know that's the reward for all the questions you asked, is to be the example. I think networks like yours and others in this room are essential to disseminating information. I mean, we know this in our world, that one-to-one is not the only way to communicate. I mean, we will have as much information as we can public, but I think it's also about putting it in your context and using examples from your work where you've been successful. And not, I should also say, having, again, been in other parts of the federal government, unfortunately, we don't have technical assistance for this bill at Treasury. I wish we did. So I say this knowing that this sounds like I'm putting the onus on you, but lifting up the examples that you come up with that are successful models, like the one you just mentioned, I think that is the best way, and through gatherings like this, And again, I hate that we can't all say, like, here's the perfect toolkit and come use this, but I think that's got to be the way to do it. Yeah. And testing and learning. I mean, it's going to be some time, I think, as we figure this out.
Wonderful. Any final questions?
Well, but I mean, you're gonna you mean that in a joking way?
Reverend Johnson has also got a great sense of humor.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, this is a long-term play, right? And so the answers we have today, I know there are projects that everybody in this room are thinking about very specifically that you want to finance, but we're going to have to collectively learn as a field how to do the things that are most efficient, that are most cost-effective, what capital stacks work, what kinds of expertise is needed. That's the stuff I wish I could sit here and tell you, but I know that that's going to take time to build. That's what I meant. And I'm not saying like you guys are experiments or anything like that. I think it's about being open to the idea that this is going to have to grow and be built, as opposed to having a perfect solution right now, unfortunately.
All right. Well, I'm going to say thank you so much, Laurel. Is there any final words you would like to share in summary before we wrap and move into the
just
next?
Gratitude. Glad to be here. Glad to be in all the different parts of the work with all of you, even for the tough questions. I appreciate it. No, it's great. It's great. Thank you. And I really do mean that I will circle back. So let's make sure we get all those more detailed questions followed up too. So I'm happy to share my email and all that. But thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much, Laurel. Thank you. Thank you for spending your time with us. Thank you for engaging. And thank you for also being so open to dialogue, and to learning.